I am notoriously awful for continuing on in series. I tend to read the first installment and then just abandon ship and go elsewhere. I think that is the mood in me. However, my 24 and 24 TBR includes a lot of sequels and second installments to series that I absolutely loved the first installment of. So we're going to be dedicating a whole reading vlog today to be getting to those second books of the books in which I read and loved and want to continue the series on with. I just want to preface this will be spoiler free, as I know these are all second installments, so I don't want to spoil you for the first one. I'll just basically be comparing my reading experience to the first one. It won't be filled with spoilers. So getting into all of the books I'm going to be continuing on with today, we first have Two Twisted Crowns, in which is the sequel to One Dark Window. Then we have The Hunting Moon, in which is the sequel to The Luminaries. Next up we have Shadow of Night, in which is the sequel to A Discovery of Witches. Then the final book I'm going to be diving into is The Hollow Heart, in which is the sequel to The Midnight Lie. So I'm very excited to be getting to all of these spectacular, hopefully spectacular reads in which I enjoyed the first book of. Grab yourself your most warming cup of tea, a cozy blanket, and let's get to reading. I'm going to be beginning the challenge with Two Twisted Crowns. I remember that One Dark Window left on quite a big cliffhanger and I was so eagerly anticipating this one actually releasing. I didn't think highly of One Dark Window, but it definitely stuck with me in terms of the plot and the characters, and I was just, the intrigue factor was so strong to know what continued on within the series. So I'm finally very excited to be beginning it and to start. So let's get to it. I think one of the hardest parts of diving into sequels when you had a bit of a break from the first installment is just trying to remember all of the characters. It's hard in my head trying to remember them all, but hopefully as the story progresses they'll all link back in again. 115 pages in and still finding my way through what the plot points are here and the characters and who they're on each other's side, and I think just generally what is sort of going on. It feels a bit like a mystery element because I'm not quite sure what's going to happen or kind of what the purpose of some of these plot points are, but I am really enjoying it. I am loving the change in perspective. I'm not usually one for a shift in perspective, but it's just really helping keep the story flowing and going, and we have about 3 different perspectives in this one, and I'm just intrigued to see how it progresses. So let's continue on. 277 pages through Two Twisted Crowns and so close to the end. So much action is happening. I'm finding some of the dialogue between two characters quite monotonous and a bit boring, and I'm kind of wanting to skim it a little bit, but apart from that the rest of the story is picking up so much. There's a flick in perspectives and there are all almost these parallel stories going on similar to the first book, and I'm just finding the stakes are really high. I'm just really invested in these characters. I'm really eager to see where it goes. Excitingly, once I finish this one I've decided what book I'm going to pick up next, and it's none of the ones on my TBR because my boyfriend so very kindly got me the second installment to the Bridge Kingdom book. If you watch my previous video hunting for a 5-star read, you'll know I read Bridge Kingdom and rated it 4.5 stars. That book ended on a cliffhanger and I just have to know how it ended, and he secretly bought me this book because he was listening to me go on and on and on about it, and so I'm very excited to dive into this one next. So I'm adding a sequel to my TBR, but for now I'm going to keep on reading this one, and oh, I'm just so nervous to see how it all ends. So I have some reading updates. I finished Two Twisted Crowns yesterday. I rated it 3.5 stars. I did enjoy it. I found it really interesting that we had these two kind of parallel stories going on, and it was splitting perspectives because it kept it quite interesting. And it also was quite a credit to the writing style because that showed how when we flipped perspectives, it was still easy to follow the story depending on what perspective we were in. And at no point did it really feel that messy, and which I thought was just, again, like I say, a credit to the writing style. This, of course, had themes of a fantasy. There was romance in here. There was also tarot style cards, but with actual abilities. Like when you use these cards, they actually embodied what they were, and you could use them as weapons almost. And then it also had kind of fairy tale elements in here as well, and like I say, dual POV and dual plotline. 3.5 stars because there were times at which I was getting a bit bored, and also the ending was immensely predictable. I'm not complaining because it did give me a good ending with a smile on my face, but it was immensely predictable and I just saw it coming for ages, and it kind of just ruined one of the character arcs for me because I feel like one of the characters was built up to be something and then the ending just demolished all of that. But I don't want to spoil anything because obviously this is a sequel. But yeah, I do recommend this duology if you're just looking for a really immersive, fun, quick pacing, interesting time. And then I moved on to The Traitor Queen and I devoured this in one night. I sat down and after dinner I read this in the bath, and then I moved and just snuggled up in bed and I just devoured this whole entire thing. It was phenomenal. 4.5 stars from me. There were times in which it was a bit frustrating because it was almost like a stereotypical nostalgic fantasy romance, but there was war politics in here as well, friendship and family, and there was obviously royalty, and yeah, there was something always going on and action always going on, and I feel like this one was much more action heavy rather than the previous one because it was almost like a character build up. It was much more romance and plot heavy. Much more romance and character heavy. Whereas this one was much more plot heavy with the characters sort of secondary there. And yeah, I just had a lot of fun with it. Like I said, it just felt very nostalgic and like your typical fantasy romance read that I just adore reading and devouring from time to time. I'm interested in picking up the third book, but I feel like from what I've read about the synopsis, the third and fourth book follow a different set of characters, and I'm not 100% keen I want to do that. So I'm quite happy with how it ended with this one. So if I don't end up picking up the next installment in the series, I won't be that sad about it. But yeah, I think eventually I might get around to doing it just because I had so much fun in this world with this writing and these characters, and the writing flies. It just makes you get sucked in and you just absorb it all. And so those are my reading updates. I didn't even get a chance to pick up the camera because I was just so in the world and so in the books, and that was just the best feeling. So in terms of my next read, I obviously have my stack here. I'm really tempting to go for the Hunting Moon because when I read the Luminaries, it had similar feelings, not similar themes, but similar feelings to what I read with the Bridge Kingdom. So I'm thinking I might go with the Hunting Moon. I think this is a YA, although I may be completely wrong. But yeah, I'm interested to see how this one carries on. I do have quite vivid memories from the Luminaries, so I'm hoping it's not too much catching up to do like it was with Two Twisted Crowns. And I'll keep you updated along my journey. I started reading The Hunting Moon yesterday in my lunch break, and I am 47 pages into it, but I've just had to put it down for a little bit, and when I was reading last night I didn't pick it up. I picked up a different book because I'm just finding it quite annoying. It's very much continuing on from the last book, well, from the first book, and I just find like the plot hasn't been developed and it's just the same thing over and over again. I think this is YA, and I can definitely feel that after reading a fantasy adult book compared to a fantasy YA. I feel like this is just not as fleshed out as the first book and just not as kind of interesting and intriguing, and I feel like I say it's just very much like the same story just trying to be rewritten. But I am going to pick it back up eventually because I do want to get through it, because I feel like there is a lot to be resolved still. I'm quite interested in the plot line and where this is going to go, but in terms of where the last book left and then this book's been picked up, I feel like it's very much dragging out that part. So yeah, but in its place, this isn't a sequel, but I picked up Mr. Wrong Number just to give me something light-hearted to read, because I didn't want to pick up another fantasy book just to cleanse my palate, so to say, while I put this down, while I read another one. And this is so much fun. I don't want to talk about it too much because obviously this is a video about reading sequels, but this is so good. If you're just looking for like a really light-hearted, kind of somewhat cheesy, very predictable, easy to digest and read, but it just has you smiling, then I recommend this book. I am so close to the end. I am 246 pages through, so I don't have long left to go. I was basically just sat in bed reading this, and I was just trying so hard to go to sleep last night, but all I could think about was this, and same when I woke up with it this morning. So I'm gonna finish this one off, and then I think I'll get back to The Hunting Moon. It's been such a long time since I updated this vlog. I have moved obviously since the last few clips that you saw and the parts of the vlog. I'm still making my way through Restless Truth, and I am 259 pages through it. I am really enjoying it, and I'm finding it a really great sequel because it's not so overlapping that you feel like you need that much knowledge from the first book. I feel like because I read it such a long time ago, the first book I'm meaning, there are some parts of my brain that are kind of missing that knowledge there, so I feel like I'm still able to enjoy this book without having the prior knowledge completely fleshed out, which I really appreciate, that it's kind of its own entity but it still does weave in. I think that is just a really great aspect of the book. And yeah, like I say, I've only got about a quarter left to go through, or maybe more like a third, and I'm just excited to see where it goes. I am finding it quite slow paced compared to the first book. I'm finding this one to be a lot, I don't know how to explain it. I'm just not really as invested as the first book. I'm not quite sure why yet, but I'm just finding the whole premise to be a bit slower, a bit almost frustrating because it's just taking so much time, but I'm hopeful that it does pick up, and I'm looking forward to it being resolved because it's almost a kind of historical novel. It's really interesting having the narratives in there as well, and I don't read historical novels very much, so perhaps that might be why. I'm just really interested to see how it progresses, and I'll keep you updated. I finished A Restless Truth, and I sadly didn't enjoy this one as much as A Marvelous Light. I'm not quite sure if it was because of the setting. I really did like the characters involved in this, but the setting I found a little bit claustrophobic because it was based on a cruise. I'm not certain if it was because it felt quite stagnant because it kind of only had so far to go. I did enjoy the mystery element that this had. It also had kind of a connection to the first book in the sense of characters from the first book and plot points from the first book were mentioned, but I quite liked how you didn't have to remember every single intricacy from this book to be able to read them individually. So if you are wanting a series that you could probably dive into and you find this concept intriguing or these themes intriguing, you could probably read this one without reading A Marvelous Light. But it did kind of help to have that background information, but I do find the thing with sequels is quite often you have to have somewhat of the intricacies and have to almost read the sequels back to back to be able to understand some of the little Easter eggs that this has encapsulated within it. Our main character was okay. There was a lot of character development that went on. Romance aspect wise, I didn't enjoy it as much as the first book. I found it was lacking a little bit, but there was this theme of like a self-explorational piece, so it made sense as to why there wasn't as heavy as a romance as the first book. Yeah, I feel like the writing lacks a bit in this one, sadly. I didn't find it as intriguing or kind of enrapturing or wanting to read it as often. I find myself getting a little bit bored at some point, which was a great shame. But yeah, it was still quite a good read. I'm so glad that I did read it, and I definitely do want to continue on this series because I am really enjoying the whole concepts and the plethora of characters that it does include and the world in terms of like a wider picture rather than this particular setting. So yeah, I'm really intrigued to read the next book. But yeah, sadly that this one didn't work for me as well as the first book. So I'm going to pick out my next sequel and then I will keep you updated. It's been a couple of days since we've checked in and I'm just about to head off to work, but I am now 125 pages through this Hollow Heart, and it's a good sequel in the fact that the story has continued on and we've got some resolutions to some of the major plot points in the previous book, but it does feel, because of where the characters are in the book, that it is dragging quite a lot. And we have this dual POV in which I found really intriguing in the second book because it helped keep the plot alive, whereas in this book I just feel it's making it drag more and just adding more to the story, that it kind of just makes it feel a bit less worthwhile because then we're just not really getting anywhere with either of the characters. One of our main characters, Niram, I'm just really not enjoying her in this book, but that is part of the plot and that is part of the reason why she is the way she is, in which if you've read this duology then you know why. But I'm just finding it very frustrating at the moment. So yeah, about halfway through, I'm hoping it picks up a bit more. I can sort of see where it's going to go, but intrigued to see how it will all wrap up. So I will continue reading and continue updating you. Finished The Hollow Heart, which is the sequel to The Midnight Lie, and sadly I'm rating it 3 stars, and I didn't really enjoy this one. It's taken me so long to read it and get through it, and I found it dragged so much. The multiple POVs was interesting and it kept the book fresh and intriguing because there was also multiple plots sort of going on within these multiple POVs, but in the end I find the whimsical writing at the very end of this book made it hard to decipher who was exactly speaking, based on the writing style alone. Sadly, I feel like this book was putting me in a bit of a slump while reading it, which is a huge shame. And yeah, I just sadly didn't really enjoy it. I found as though a lot of it wasn't necessary, a lot of it was strung out, and it could have almost just been a bigger book originally. The Midnight Light could have just been a bigger book and packed this in there. Yeah, so sadly not a great ending to this reading adventure. I still have loads of other sequels that I want to get to, but I just don't want to continue on this adventure at the moment because I am feeling the cusps of a slump beginning to form. So I'm gonna end this little adventure right here and hopefully maybe do a part 2. So thank you ever so much for joining me. I hope that wherever you are and whatever you're doing, you have a wonderful day or night, and until next time, friends, bye.